Hi, everyone. We'll let you settle in. Good afternoon and welcome to LIBOR's Wednesday webinar. My name is Marianne Monteleone, Vice President of Professional Development, and we're glad that you can join in with us today. Today's topic is bias override, insights and solutions, and we have a really special guest here with us, Lynn Fields. So let me just introduce her formally and then welcome her as our friend at LIBOR. Lynn Fields is the principal instructor for the Professional Institute for Real Estate Training. She has co-authored the Broker's Textbook, New York Real Estate for Brokers, and brings enthusiasm, knowledge, and dedication to her courses. She is a NYSAR instructor and was one of the first 20 individuals chosen to teach the NAR Bias Override class. She has been teaching for over 40 years and has been licensed as a broker since 1981. She has authored over 30 courses and she balances fun and education. She genuinely cares about all students, past, present, and future, and we welcome our friend Lynn Fields. Thanks for being with us.
Thank you, Marianne. Good morning, everybody. Today we're going to talk a little bit about bias override, insights and solutions. Now, I know you all have questions. If you feel the need to ask a question as we go along, that's fine. Or if you'd like to hold your questions to the end, that would be great too. So let's delve in and find out why bias override is such an important course, besides the fact that it gives you 2 hours of implicit bias continuing education training. As we all know, our situations nowadays are different than what they were 20 years ago. Some of you haven't been in the business that long, but for those of you who have, you recognize that things are much more insightful now. We have to be so careful on how we work with our buyers and our sellers and people around us. There is an organization called the Perception Institute, and you can go to their website, which is perception.org, and find out all about them. They were contracted by the National Association of Realtors to help produce a course that makes us all much better real estate professionals. That's known as bias override. Bias override is a 3-hour course that is available to any association that wants it. And what it does is it helps you understand where we've been in the fair housing issues so that we know where we're going to go. It is a wonderful course because it helps interrupt your stereotypic thinking. And we all have stereotypic thinking. I know when I was a young person, my father was well, we'll say he was less than open to many people. And he imparted some things to me, and I thank heavens I had my mom to help me overcome those. If you knew the course, if you knew the television show Archie Bunker, that was my dad. And he was a really nice guy, but he just was set in his ways. Well, in stereotypic thinking, we have to look back and say, where did we get that from? Was it from our family? Was it from our peers? Was it from situations that happened to our friends that now we assume, and you know that word is a terrible one, we assume stuff? Well, we have to get past that, and we have to understand something else. When it comes to stereotypic thinking and identity anxiety and implicit bias, this is something we all have. Now you can say, I don't see color. We all see color. You can say, I'm not biased. Well, we all have our biases. I don't particularly like the color orange. I'm biased against it. If you wore an orange shirt to a meeting with me, I might look at you funny and say, why are you doing that? I live in Northern New York. I live in Watertown, and that's all the way to the top of the state by Ottawa. So when we have Canadian people come across the border, because now, thank heavens, they can, sometimes if they pull out in front of you or drive erratically, you want to say, hey, you so-and-so, get out of my way. Well, now where'd that come from? I don't know. Maybe because I got into a car accident with somebody from Canada. No, I didn't, but I'm just saying that. So these are all biases that we have to recognize. And when we recognize them, it helps us avoid all of the pitfalls and all of the issues that we have on a daily basis with our clients and our customers. You live in an area where you have a lot of people coming in from other parts of the country and other parts of the world to buy property. We have the same because we have something up here called Fort Drum, New York. And it's a very large military installation where lots of people from around the world come. Okay? We have to know how to work with these folks. And if indeed we slip up and say something wrong, we have to know how to deal with that too. So bias override helps you do that. It was put together, as I said, with the NER and also with the Perception Institute. And the two primary people are Afua Addo and Rachel Godsill. You'll see them on the Perception website. These women are absolutely phenomenal. And they had been doing this for a long time. And it took a long time for this course to come about. Now, what can you learn? You can learn about the history of segregation and the history of discrimination. And as I said, you have to know where you're going, where you were to know where you're going. It also helps you learn about the mind science of identity. And we have some great, they're not games, but they're interesting studies that we involve you in. One of them is called the Stoop test. Okay. One of them is called the DISC test. And we examine those with you. And in fact, one of them is so much fun. You see colors written out on a line. On the next line, you will see the same letters, but the colors are changed. Well, what we want you to do is to be able to identify the word, not the color. And in some cases, the color, not the word. And that's, you're thinking, well, why do you have something like that? Well, because we already have biases of colors. We already don't recognize some of the things in us. One of the other things we do is we talk specifically about anxiety, about identity, about implicit bias, and about stereotypic roles. Now, that's a really long in process, but we examine it. We look at it and say, okay, how are we going to do this? How can we help to eliminate some of our identity anxiety? Have you taken the Perception Institute's IT test? If you haven't, I urge you to do so. It is a series of questions or a series of pictures, and you have to identify if you think somebody is good or somebody is bad. And many times you'll find the same person in the same picture. I really urge, and it's also for real estate, it's for women, it's for all sorts of things. Men, how you view men, how you view children. So I would urge you to take a look at that. We also look at how neighborhoods become segregated. We talk about the issues of things like Jim Crow laws. We talk about things that are really sensitive when we talk about the history. Okay. And it helps you because this is not an easy course. I will be honest with you. You sit there and you have to identify stuff that you've got going on. And you also have to identify how you can make yourself better. What else do we do? Well, we look at how implicit bias results in violations of fair housing. Okay. We have so many laws now that we have to take care of and be a part of. We have so much that we have to understand. And hopefully by understanding what you are thinking and how you do it, you can look at it and say, I'm not going to violate those laws. It's not going to happen. That's why we have cultural competency courses now. It's why we have implicit bias courses now. Let's see, what else does it do? It does help us understand the differences between implicit bias and explicit bias. Now, you didn't know there were two of them, but implicit bias is what you don't say, but you think. Wherein explicit bias is what you say and think. So what we try to do is we try to make sure that you understand the differences and how to overcome both. I think the big thing is there's lots of group discussion. We do breakout rooms. We do self-analysis. I think that that's important. We also talk about global biases. You know, as I mentioned, you have a lot of people coming in from other countries. We do as well. How does a global bias affect us in our business? Do we need to work on it? Sure we do. How are we going to do it? Well, bias override helps. We have to learn whether or not we are gatekeepers or whether we're guides. Now you might think, what's the difference between a gatekeeper and a guide? Well, a gatekeeper is the person who shuts the door and says it's going to be my way. The guide is the person who assists the buyer or seller and basically acts as concierge, if you will. So we work into that. We delve into something called the fairness paradox. The fairness paradox is an interesting one because we have to analyze what is fair, how fair is it, and is it right? It's almost as if we're taking an ethics course and seeing what works. So we delve into that. We talk about racial covenants. You all are very aware of them, I know, from where you live. And we also try to see how we can help overcome that. So I think, you know, it's a wonderful course. It also helps us understand how to treat our consumers with the respect and the honesty and the honor that they need. It's not a course in kiss, bow, or shake hands, believe me. But what it is it helps us open our eyes to see where we're going and how we can best serve our clients without losing our license, because we don't want that to happen again. We want to make sure everything is visible and it's understandable and that we don't make the same mistake again, because that's been going on for years and years and years. Let's take a new leaf and let's really try to help. So by discussions and interactions and reinforcements and a few fun videos along the way too, because that's good. When I teach, I tell people to go ahead and get their popcorn. We're all going to be made better people. And I think that's what's most important. So I urge you, there is a course coming up. Bias Override is going to be taught by Randy Templeman. And he's a fantastic guy. We all know Randy. It's through NYSAR. And I would urge you to consider taking that, because I think it will make you a better person, both in your personal life and in your professional life. I'm trying to stretch this out, Marianne, for a long time. I wonder if there are any questions, Ethan.
It looks like we haven't gotten anything in yet, Lynn.
Okay, thanks, Ethan. I mean, I don't know much more to say except that people really need to take this course. It's fantastic. It helps you understand what biases you have. And we, like I said earlier, we all have them. And it really helps you overcome them, because we don't want anybody to say the wrong thing, even in jest or off the cuff, because that's what gets us into trouble these days.
Oh, here we have one. We have a question asking when the course starts.
Okay, we'd have to go to nysar.com. I don't have that information. Maybe Marianne does in front of her.
I think, hi, Lynn.
Hi.
I think it's March 24th. I'm going to put it in the chat for everybody.
Great, thank you.
Mhm.
Oh yeah, thank you. I'm here if you need any questions answered. You have.
Can you give us an overview of the components of the course?
Oh,
I know
absolutely, absolutely. If you'll bear with me just 1 second, I'll be happy to get that for you. You're welcome. Okay. Well, we do an introduction to training, and we talk about agents, real estate agents, as gatekeepers or guides. Okay. We talk about that fairness paradox, and that basically is a challenge in what we believe and what we do and how we do it differently. The element of the work is to address the question is how possible is it for people who believe themselves to be fair and who want to be fair to behave in ways that are inconsistent with fairness goals? That happens to us, okay? We're going to talk about describing the phenomena of identity, identity anxiety, implicit bias, and stereotypic threats, and how they operate on an interpersonal level. We're going to identify at least one intervention with each phenomena to put into practice that's in the sphere of influence. We're going to increase, hopefully, your personal motivation. We're going to do some quick group assignments. It's also known as something called a brave space assignment. And one of the beautiful things about this course is that, yes, it is, it touches a few of us. It bothers us. But what we do is we have a brave space. In other words, a space where we can all identify and understand. And we want to make sure that everybody has a shared moment. If they are uncomfortable with it, they don't have to respond to it. But we talk a little bit about that. Then we talk about who's in your network. Kind of a situation where it takes you back to Sales 101 when you learned about sphere of influences. We want to see how you identify yourself with some people, and see how homogeneous, I can't say that word, sorry, homogeneously you work with other folks. We're going to share, ideas, how you got to know other people. Did you know them from school? Did you know them from high school? Were they your mentor? Was it your mentee? What was the makeup of your high school reunion? Things like that. And then we have to figure out why we're still separated by race. There's a movie called How the Irish Became White. That's an interesting one because for years and years and years, they were thought of, quite honestly, and I'm not berating anybody, but this is in the video, as people who were less than understanding, less than honorable, and mostly like to drink. Well, how did that happen? So we talk about things like that. When my father, and I told you about Dad, used to say to me as a child, well, you can't go out with people of a different ethnicity because they have you washing clothes and ironing clothes and having babies while they're out goofing around on you. Where'd that come from? So what we do is we try to find out. We talk about, again, as I said, racial covenants. We talk about blockbusting. We talk about steering. We're very upfront with that. We talk about the federal laws. We talk again more about blockbusting and the Supreme Court decisions and how they either were upheld or just cast aside. We talk about global bias. We talk about implicit bias. We talk about implicit bias in housing, based on race. The Loving group, the Loving couple made me think of that. If you're familiar with them, also Jones versus Meyer, we talk about that. We talk about lots of things that people want to buy. We talk about a little bit about Levittown. Okay. Then we do the Stroop test, which is interesting. And then we actually do how we are dealing with stereotypes nowadays. Why is it so difficult for our brain to get past stereotypes? It's really an interesting portion of the class because we have to dig back and say, now, how did that happen? We talk about schemas. They're mental structures or categories that our brains use to organize information around us so we make decisions quickly. We talk about them. When it comes to people, however, we're actually necessary for us to function. We know what role people play. We want to know how they got there. Okay. Video on race and appraisals, an interesting one. That's a very interesting one. We talk about implicit bias for unconscious and conscious brain. And again, what's happening there? Our brains do categorize people by age, by gender, by sex. It also skews for race as well as an ethnicity. When you look at somebody, you sometimes see their race, but don't see anything else about them. So we talk about that. As I mentioned, we do talk about steering a lot. We also talk about it with regard to the NAR Code of Ethics. We talk about the Fair Housing Act. We talk about denial of equal services. In other words, Somebody wants to buy a piece of property and they're going to a bank for a mortgage, and perhaps the redlining does exist unconsciously, but it does exist. So we talk about that. Why do Black people have fewer homes than white people? We talk about that. We talk about interventions. We talk about owner identity anxiety. And what is identity anxiety? Well, it's psychological stress response where you experience it before you walk into a room or a racial interaction. Think about it. When you're getting ready to walk into a client's home for the first time, if you still do that, because some places they don't, they do everything by Zoom. But if you do that, first time you interact with a potential client, are you a little concerned? Are you a little nervous? This is all the things that you have to think about. When you go into a room and you don't know anybody, and how do you feel? Do you go to a corner? Do you interact with people? This is what we need to discuss. And we have a video, which is a very interesting one. It talks about young people and how young people see themselves. So that's a great one. Then we talk about interpersonal impact of identity anxiety. Avoidance sometimes happens, you know. We undermine that client experience and we avoid it. We don't want to be around it. So it talks about maybe leading an agent on to take a protective self-preservational style. And then we talk about the burden on clients of color because of a lack of representation over the years of agents. Many clients will act with an agent who's biased and anxiety, and they have to manage it. We have to talk about institutional impacts of anxiety, work allocations, you know, client contact, formal mentoring we talk about. We have a lot of group time. We have lots of polls. Let's see what else we have a couple of concepts called the No method. And basically it's what we're going to learn. It's adopting the no strategy. We've talked about interpersonal contact, no names when we tend to rush past our learning names, take time to do it. Open conversation. The reset method. Have you ever stuck your foot in your mouth? I did a couple of times in my lifetime. And what the reset method does is it helps you understand, I goofed up. Now, what do I do? Do I apologize and go on in length about that? Or do I just apologize and move on and learn from it? So we talk about that. That's an interesting one. We have a group activity on that. And, you know, again, we talk about the different types of bias override tools, institutional action where we raise awareness, we have bias override, we have clear protocols. And then we talk about working with buyers and working with sellers. Then we talk about the stereotypic threat and we review it. We talk about how it got there. We have a video on it. We have experiencing the stereotypic threat. What happens? Our brain's focused on disapproving the negative reputation. Well, how do we get there? Our heart rate increases. I don't know about you, but if I mess up, my neck gets really, really red. Okay. Our blood pressure rises. Our brain just moves everything out of the way. And what causes that threat? We discuss that too. And then we discuss something else, which is interesting. What is a threat? How did we get that threat? For example, there's this man with a Spanish surname that they feel in phone consultations with healthcare staff. There's a lack of respect. They think they can get away with it because he is, and I quote from the class, dumb Mexican. And that came from a study that Grady and Edgar did in 2003. We talk about maladaptive coping responses, excuse me. In other words, what happens when anxiety steps in? We all tend to get nervous. What do we do about it? Okay. How does this undermine all the processes? We had talked about reducing the threats, obviously. And then we talk about different things like stereotypic threat interventions, how to work in a safe environment, how to work with our fellow real estate professionals. You know, we have to trust that those agents are our allies. So we work with that, and then we do a conclusion. So it's very, very extensive. And I think it's a real benefit for you because, as I said earlier, there are things that we don't even know that we have. All right, I see that there's questions in the chat.
Let's take a look. I think I was able to answer one of them, Lynn. It says completion of this course is a part of NAR's President's Challenge. Yes, it
Yes,
is.
it is.
Uh-huh. And then I reminded everyone that it is approved for 2 hours of implicit bias CE credit, which is a core required topic needed in order to renew your real estate license.
Yep.
And LIBOR is a license holder with NAR directly, so we'll be looking to schedule that class several times for anybody who wants it. It sounds very interesting. It sounds interactive.
Mhm.
And it's 3 hours. It must
3
be
hours,
a
yes.
jam-packed 3-hour class. So we thank you for being here with us. I'm not quite sure. I don't see any other questions.
I will say this, if you ever take
One
a
of them.
course from me, folks, quite honestly, it's not boring, believe me. So it was my pleasure, Marianne, to be able to help. And if there's anything I can do for you, you know to let me know.
Yes, we'll be calling on you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a great and safe day. Thanks, Lynn.
Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.